All right, I've had another request for some help with the methods section. So I'm starting again in the syllabus on page 6. And so I'll call your attention to that. So what's happened is you've just completed your review of the literature. You have told us the problem, told us what we know, told us what we still need to know, and hopefully you have located gaps in the literature that lead you to a really narrow testable research question. And this is where we pick up for the method section. So this will be about 3 to 4 pages, maybe a little bit longer, depending on how complex your methods are. But you are going to be telling me how you're going to answer those research questions. This is kind of like a recipe, if you can think of it that way. You're going to give me all the information that I would need to be able to conduct this study on my own without having to ask you to help me along the way. So it has to have a lot of detail. You're telling me how this is going to happen. You can also think of it as if you were asking for funding. You were writing a grant proposal, and you'd want to demonstrate that you had thought this through well enough that you knew exactly what you were going to do, how you were going to do it, how many people you would need to do it with, and that you have a plan, and it's solid, and it's going to work. Okay? So with that said, you're going to start off by talking about the type of study that you've chosen to do, the type of study that will best answer the research questions, whether it's quantitative or qualitative. If it's quantitative, you'll tell me what kind of quantitative design you're going to use. Is it correlational? Is it experimental? Survey? Observational? Are you going to do an experiment? Is it a factorial design? All these kinds of things. If it's qualitative, you're going to tell me what tradition you're using. Is it phenomenology? Is it narrative? Is it ethnography? Is it case study? Etc. You're going to give a solid rationale for the design you've chosen. Now, this rationale should have been started in the lit review. I should kind of know what you're telling us people need to do, future research needs to investigate, and that should have led to sort of the design you've chosen. But here you'll also sort of back that up with a solid rationale, and you can use your textbook as a citation for these two things I've already discussed as to why this approach is the best approach to use to answer the question that you've identified. Then you're going to tell me about the people, the participants that you need to answer this question. Who are they? How old are they? What other characteristics do they have that are important for me to know about? You're going to give a lot of detail about them and explain why they are your target group for this particular study. You're going to talk about how they're going to be recruited. Where will you find them? How will you get access to them? How will you let them know what the study is about? How will you obtain consent? How will you get them the study materials? Really a lot of detail here, remember, because if I'm going to go back and try to do this study without having you to ask how to do it, I need to have a lot of good detail about how this would happen. We need the procedures in great detail. What is going to happen in this study? If it's an observation, how many times will you observe? How much time will be in between observations? What will you do when you go there to observe? Will you do any pre-observation visits to sort of get rid of that sort of Hawthorne effect? All that stuff needs to be in there. What will the participants have to do in your study? Is it an online survey? Is it a questionnaire? Is it a checklist they fill out? Is it an experiment where they come in and they do something with you and they leave for a little while and they come back at another time? All that in great detail needs to be provided. You're also going to talk about, if it's quantitative, your independent and dependent variables. So the independent variables are the things that you think are going to influence your outcome, and so you'll operationalize those. The dependent variable is what you think will be influenced, and you need to operationalize that as well. What that means is, how will you assign a number to that definition that's just been conceptual up to this point? So for example, if I am doing a study of child care quality, I might tell you that the global quality of the program will be operationalized will be assessed using the overall quality score from the Early Childhood Environment Rating Scale Revised Edition. I'll cite that source. I'll tell you a little bit about that instrument, how it's administered, what its items look like, that it's a 7-point scale, what a 1 means, what a 7 means. I need to give my reader enough information that they can tell what a number means, first of all, when they see it. Is it good? Is it bad? Is it high? Is it low? Is it indicative of positive or negative? That kind of thing. And how that score was derived or come to. If I'm doing an observation like that, I also need to talk about how I've established inter-rater reliability. and all those sorts of things that relate to reliability and validity of my study design. I also need to talk about the reliability and validity of that particular instrument, which should be available in the technical manual if you have access to it, or in another article, or a lot of times after they've published our instrument, there'll be an article where they've validated it for you, and they'll publish those findings. If it's qualitative, you aren't going to have independent and dependent variables. But you will want to talk about things like maybe the geographical context of your study or the researcher's perspective on this particular phenomenon. And so you'll have to attend to both of those things if you're doing qualitative. If you're doing either kind of study, when you're talking about your sample, I'm sorry to be jumping backwards, but if you're talking about your sample, you also need to talk about what sampling method you're going to use to get your participants. So if it's quantitative, are you using probability or non-probability sampling? And how will that occur? And what does that mean? And what's the benefit of that? If you're doing qualitative, you'll want to talk a little bit more about why you've picked the people you've picked. Are they sort of similar? Are you looking for people who all have a very similar experience, people who have diverse experiences? How have you chosen that particular group? You'll also need to think about how many you need to recruit. In qualitative, you'll use the tradition, or the tradition that you're using will kind of dictate how many you'll have. If it's quantitative, you can use G-Power, which is a statistical program. It's free download from the internet. It's from a university in Germany, and you just download it for free, and then you can punch in what kind of analysis you're doing, how many variables you have, and it will tell you how many participants that you need. And you would write that up in your method section. An a priori power analysis using G-Power indicated a need for 152 participants to have sufficient power to, note statistical differences. And so those are just sort of some things to be kind of thinking about. There are some examples in our course that you can go look at of both quantitative and qualitative research proposals, where you can see some good examples of how to operationalize variables, as well as how to discuss sort of that geographical context, the researcher's perspective that I talked about. Many of them are dissertation proposals, so they're much more in-depth than what you're writing for this class, but they're still helpful in terms of seeing what to include, how to discuss it, how to format it, that kind of thing. There are also some complete mini proposals from a different class that I teach that are just examples of exemplary work. They are not perfect, but they are examples of people who've done well on an assignment similar to this. And so you can kind of look at those for some examples as well. So I hope that was helpful. If not, email me, put a question on the Q&A board for the instructor if you think it's a question that everybody might benefit from hearing the answer to, and keep up the good work.